Good afternoon, everyone. Live from Silicon Valley, California. This is Spiritual Fitness with your host, Vaishishika Prabhu, a veteran Bhakti yogi, former monk, and author, and myself, JM. Spiritual Fitness is a weekly program dedicated to exploring the timeless text of Bhakti yoga and spiritual practices that you can apply in your daily life, leading to spiritual perfection. We have more than 35 members on Zoom and more than 50 members on Facebook. Uh, Good afternoon, Vaishka Prabhu. Welcome.
Thank you, JM. I like your new backdrop.
Thanks.
Looks very nice. Exotic, actually. With that goes with the shirt and everything. It's good to see you, as usual. And welcome to everybody. I'm so glad to be back with you all to take some time to introspect and to develop vivek or discrimination. One of the aspects of yoga, which is very important, developing the buddhi or the intelligence. And today's topic is about frustration. I was curious if any of you if you knew what I was talking about when I mentioned it. Frustration. Anyone? Uh, we'll ask you later for particulars. But contrary to the way it feels, the yoga texts say that actually frustration is the door to enlightenment. There's a way in which when we become frustrated, there's a certain energy there, believe it or not, that is actually beckoning us, opening up a door to show us something better, something higher. And wouldn't that be nice? Because there's so many opportunities to get frustrated in this world, don't you think? A lot of opportunity out there. So first of all, let's start with a centering activity for mindfulness and introspection. It's one of the most exciting things to do on a regular basis because oftentimes I'm so externally focused that I forget about the inner workings of my mind, of my body, and when I take a moment just to look at myself, it's actually refreshing. It's a restart. So let's try it. What do you think? Okay. So sit up just a little straighter than you were a second ago. And you'll notice that when you do that, your mind comes to attention. And then find a comfortable place on your seat and close your eyes. And take a great luxury right now to breathe. And just experience what it feels like to breathe and focus on your breathing without any other concerns. Because concerns can dog us all day long. And when they do, our breathing gets affected and it tends to tighten us up. But if you reverse engineer and go back to your breath and remember what's important, as Stephen Covey used to say, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Main thing in our body is breath. We can't do without it, even for a few seconds. So take some time to just settle into breathing and bring your attention, which is our only real asset, our attention and where we decide to place it, and put it on your breath. And one of the ways to keep your mind absorbed in one place and on the breath is to have gratitude for your breath. It's being supplied. It's coming to us to nourish us from a source beyond ourselves. So give yourself in gratitude to that source that's giving the oxygen. And know as you breathe in, all the cells in your body are breathing with you and they're feeling nourished. And as you exhale, let out any kind of anxiety and just let it float out. And notice If you're able to keep your attention on your breath, or if it darts off somewhere else, and if it does, just bring your focus back to your breath. And breathe and relax. The Srimad Bhagavatam, ancient wisdom on yoga, teaches that there are energy centers within the body. The seat of consciousness is in the energy center around the heart region. So now try bringing your awareness, your main asset in life. You get to choose where you place it. You're free to do that. Move it to your heart center. Might be aware of your heart beating, and that there is an energy center there around your heart. And breathe and stay aware of this energy center. Next, consciously take a view as a witness. The witness only watches what's going on. He or she is not involved in the situation, doesn't have to get involved. But please take a moment to notice your body. You can start with your feet and just observe that there are feet with toenails. You can point your attention there. You can take a look at your legs. Now move to your hands and arms. Your body. Be aware that there's internal organs that are all working in concert right now. You don't have to push any buttons. They just work. And move your awareness to your head. And now in a more subtle observation, see if you can notice thought energy. You are not your thoughts because you're observing them. You're the witness. Can you see your thoughts? Can you notice that they're energy, just like clouds are energy or wind is energy? They're subtle, but they're merely energy. See if you can identify any of the thoughts that are going through your head and objectify them. Notice, I'm the witness. My thoughts are things. I am not my thoughts. And breathe. And now to introduce another kind of energy into our mental system and into our bodies with our eyes closed. We'll repeat the one-syllable mantra Om. I'll begin, and then behind closed mics, you can say it within your throat using your vocal cords and feel the resonance in your chest and heart area. Now just notice for a minute how the mantra has introduced some energy into your mental system. This mantra, Om, resonates with the energy center of the heart. And now we'll say 3 times the mantra that invokes compassion. It opens the heart. Nitai Gauranga. So I'll do 3 times with the breath, and you can follow me behind muted mics. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. And notice again that there's a new kind of energy we've introduced into our minds, into our bodies. The quality of the sound vibration that we choose to listen to will determine the quality of our life. And at any time we have the choice, free will, volition, that allows us to place our attention wherever we wish, but it takes practice. So I may mindlessly be carried away to one object after the next and be in kind of a trance in the material energy and forget about myself, which is non-neural, non-chemical, non-mechanical, non-temporal. It's antimatter, categorically different from the thought energy, categorically different from the body, and from the elements of the world. We are observers here, and we can develop the eyes of the witness. Now bring your attention back to your breath. And remember how valuable it is, more valuable than any wealth we may accumulate, is our ability to breathe. Be grateful. And rub your hands together to bring some sensation back to the external body. Slowly open your eyes, and we'll come back from our vacation into the virtual room we're all sitting in. And welcome back. So this kind of introspection is available. It does take a little work because oftentimes the mind says I'm too busy and says I'm not going to like it. And even if we sit down for a moment, especially if by ourselves, maybe there'll be some distractions. So the process of introspection gets better as we practice it. And one of the ways it gets better is we get a higher taste. As in any spiritual practice, unless we get a fruit, we don't come back. Just like if you go to a store and they don't treat you nicely, you don't go back. You just have a bad feeling. Or if you have a nice experience, then you'll go back. So it's helpful to practice until you can get a little inspiration. We call this inspirational sadhana. Sadhana means a practice that takes you to a goal. And the goal here is to come to a place where we can experience joy in ourself. We feel enough. Whatever I have now is enough because I exist. And I always exist. I always will exist. All the anxiety that I feel generally comes around my identification with the outside world. And that includes, interestingly, my own body and mind, which is a vehicle. I'm simply residing within it. And the more I'm able to find my identification as the witness who's watching the body, who's watching the mind, who's watching the life situation unfold around me, the more I can sense that I'm always okay in the moment. There's never a time when I'm not okay. So what happens then when we get frustrated? In the etymological dictionary that I frequent online, there's a relationship between the word frustrate and fraud. And actually, technically, it means that we feel something's in vain. It means there's nothing in it. I'm not going to get anything out of this. One of the most famous books on yoga, the Bhagavad Gita, starts with a chapter that is called Vishad Yoga. Vishad means despair. The yoga of despair, which is a kind of inflamed sense of frustration. And the hero of the book, Arjuna, becomes completely frustrated. He doesn't know what to do. And that's how the whole book starts. And it's very easy to relate, I think, with Arjuna, because it's so easy to get frustrated in this world. So here's a simple definition of frustration that I wrote just to guide the conversation today. Frustration is a powerful energy that can bring us to a new high in life. It can fuel the fire that ignites personal introspection, growth, and vision. And if we look into frustration, we can observe that one of the main features is, or I should say, one of the ways that it's triggered in me is that I feel out of control. I have thoughts about the way something should be, but then I suddenly see that it's not going my way. Have you ever had that experience? You have a plan, you have a vision for how something should be, but it's not going that way at all? Anyone? Jayham's smiling. Why does that make you so happy, Jayham? Just thinking about frustration.
No, it's just right now, I think pretty much everyone is against their own will, forced to stay at home. So there is lots of frustration going on.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's a rare opportunity when we can all be in the same frustration boat together. One of my friends wrote a book which became very popular. It's called Hiding in Unnatural Happiness. And in it, he talks about the concept of mass consensual trance. People of the world get into mass consensual trance and ignore what's important in their lives, ignore the environment, trash the environment, go on. It's okay. We're all in trance together. And there's a way in which I've heard some people say this pandemic is a time of great frustration in a lot of ways. And at the same time, it is a time when that frustration is bringing us, and one of the terms I wanted to bring into the discussion today is teachable moments. Teachable moments I would propose, are very rare in life. They could be more plentiful, but there's a way in which I tend to want to avoid them because oftentimes they're preceded by frustration. But when I get a teachable moment, there's a fork in the road and I'm forced to make a decision. And because of that, I look at the world in a completely new way, from a higher perspective. And I have to remember, what am I doing here in the first place? And that's what happens in the Bhagavad Gita when Arjuna gets frustrated because he has to go into battle. He's a warrior. And as he looks at the battle situation, he's fighting against his own family. And from that situation, he becomes extremely frustrated with whether to do his duty or whether to back out of the fight and so forth. And this brings the questions that he starts to ask to his teacher that bring him to a state of enlightened awareness about the world. So frustration is that time in which we can get a teachable moment. Since you brought it up, JM, about the pandemic, I think it would be nice to hear if anybody else has had any. First of all, have you had any frustrations, small or large, about the pandemic? And if so, has there been any kind of insight that you've gained from it in the way that I'm speaking about a teachable moment? Has anything like that happened? There's a lot of stuff coming here on the chat box. Do you want to tell me what's happening there, JM?
Yeah, so Fahi really liked the wonderful vacation we started the session with. So he was grateful, and he also wants the definition of frustration, which you just mentioned. I said, yeah, we'll share it shortly after the call. And they all agree as well what we are sharing, basically.
Okay.
Kids keep bringing their frustration daily with that we are all locked. So there are lots of feedback that they all are sharing the frustration.
So here, I'm just sharing my definition. And you said Rosiro?
Yeah,
Rocio said the kids keep bringing their frustration daily.
Yes.
So
yes.
Yeah, tell us what's happening.
Yeah, like for instance, right? I'm part of the PCH chipset engineering group, and of course our hours are always crazy working, and it's just a constant reminder. I'm pretty busy, so that distracts me, but constant reminder from my kids saying, we would have been in Disneyland today. By this time we would have been in the beach, but no, we're here. Oh, Mommy, I'm bored. Oh my gosh, it's like I try to explain to them, situation. I'm taking notes as you speak today, just to bring it, bring a different feel, right? Some positive feel for them. But yeah, that's something that daily is on my head. Thanks to them, they put me in a frustration mode.
Ooh, you said thanks to them. That's a very enlightened point.
Yeah, I'm frustrated.
No, it is, and I would just. This is really important what you just said, Rosiro, because if we approach it as an opportunity, as a teachable moment, and I'm asking what's the lesson in this from the frustration, then we'll deal with it a completely different way than we might have normally. There's a couple of cousins of frustration. Can you say who you think the cousins are? Who are the frustration's cousins? I wrote down a couple. Yes?
No, I don't.
Okay, here's my supposition.
Disappointment,
yes.
Restlessness.
Angry.
Oh, there's a lot of them. That frustration has a lot of cousins. Someone said anger, disappointment,
Restlessness.
and restlessness. So let's look at those three, the cousins of frustration. So disappointment. What disappointment means, you were appointed to something. In other words, you had an idea of how it was going to go. You were in a position, at least you thought you were, and then all of a sudden you're disappointed. You're taken out of your appointed position. You had your whole scene together. Everything was working the way you thought it should work. And, hey, this is me. This is my life. And then all of a sudden you're disappointed. Someone comes along like a little virus and says, hey, you're out. No more income, no more whatever it is. You don't have it anymore. You're disappointed. And restlessness There's obviously a way in which restful, and the opposite, restless. And anger is something that's a very powerful destructive energy. When we get angry, I mean, years and years ago, here on the peninsula, I remember hearing about a man who was in an altercation, road rage, with somebody. It was a motorcyclist, and this man was driving a truck, and they got into an altercation on the road, and the man in the truck just turned his wheel slightly and bumped into the motorcyclist, who went off the road and was killed. And the person driving the pickup truck, normally an upstanding citizen, never had a record, never been in trouble in his life, was then culpable for murder. And this came in a moment of frustration and anger that just sort of induced a kind of a knee-jerk reaction in him. So there's a way in which frustration can take us either way. We can become angry and destructive. If you snap at somebody when you're frustrated, then that can cause a lingering distrust with that person. You said those words. So in yoga, one of the ways in which one comes to clear consciousness is by dealing with frustration as an energy to take one to a higher level. So here are a few thoughts about that. One is that when frustration arises, then we should be mindful of it. Just as we took time to introspect and look at our thoughts and our own bodies, and we noticed that thoughts are things. Do you remember that part of the introspection? Thoughts are things. And did any of you have the perspective that you were the witness and you saw your thoughts as separate energy when we did that part? Did that happen?
Mhm.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So another kind of energy is frustration. So one of the ways in which one can rise above frustration and not be overpowered by it, not be hit by it like hit by a wave, is to be mindful of your feelings when they arise. So when those feelings come up, you notice them, observe them, and ask yourself what's working and what's not working about this situation. Be very objective. And then most of you know, all of you know this term, troubleshoot. It's a very helpful term. To me, troubleshooting means to be methodical but dispassionate. These two words go really well together. They should be married eternally. The methodical means you do what you have to do. There's a process you have to go through. But be dispassionate. If you put those two concepts together, then you can move forward with the situation without overreacting to the frustration. And then you can channel that energy to a higher level. And we'll talk more about that. I'll also introduce something from a very powerful book called The Four Agreements, in which the author talks about ways in which to develop this kind of sense of being dispassionate. And here are the four. The first one is that your speech should be impeccable. Impeccable comes from a Latin word impeciare, from the Latin word impeciare, which means without fault. And so be careful what you speak, because if you speak words of disappointment all of a sudden, then that will tend to pervade your consciousness. If you say something encouraging to yourself, like, what's the lesson? This is a teachable moment, then it will redirect your attention. The second in the four agreements is don't take anything personally. Nobody's out to get you, but if I take it personally, then it becomes a great burden. But I'm not obligated to take it personally. Just like you're not obligated to answer the phone when it says scam likely. My iPhone has that little message, says scam likely. Don't answer it. So when there's provocation, you don't have to answer it necessarily with anger or a heavy reaction. Be methodical but dispassionate. Don't take it personally. The third is never assume, because when we assume, then we're jumping into an unknown gap, and from there, there's a very good opportunity that will make a mistake in which we'll become disturbed. And the fourth is always do your best. Your best may change from moment to moment, from day to day, from year to year, but if you're doing the best you can in a situation, you can't ask any more from yourself. So these four sort of magically give a formula for being dispassionate. If you keep these in mind as you're interacting. And also when frustration comes up, see more of it as a puzzle to be solved rather than somebody's out to get you. Don't take it personally. So just, how do I solve this? So before I go into a very highly philosophical aspect of this, to talk about why it leads to self-realization, I'd just like to get a few reflections.
Zach just asked to repeat the fourth point.
Okay. You know what I'm going to do? Because I think I can. I'm going to put it right in the chat box. Because that way. How's that?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes. Fourth one is do your best. In every situation, there's a best you can do. And after that, what more can be asked of you? What other, let's just, mix it up. You don't have to be precise or anything, but any impressions from anything so far. We're just taking this little intermission to talk about anything that's you've heard in the discussion or felt in the meditation, introspection, that you want to report back to everybody for our edification, because it's a conversation. It's not a monologue.
I'd like to share something, if that's
Please.
okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
A couple of things. One, that I've been seeing a counselor recently, just for my own mental health. And one of the things he mentioned was that your thoughts don't define you, and someone's opinion of you doesn't define you. And that really struck a chord with me. And then the other thing I wanted to share was I have a 3-year-old who's starting to become a teenager, as we call it, right? And he, I've been shouting at him, which I'm not proud of, right? Because you get frustrated, I lose my temper, I shout at him, I say, don't do that. Then he started shouting back at me, and then I realized he's learning that from me. So now I whisper, and I say, Kylan, come here, Daddy wants to talk to you. And he ends up coming over very calmly and listening to what I have to say, which is a total change from where he was, So being careful of the words you use, don't take it personally, and do your best really struck a chord with me. And then never assume, right? So, yeah.
This is a gem, real gem. Thank you for bringing that. Let me say why I feel that way. There's a sort of an amorphous term that's used here and there, karma. Oftentimes people talk about karma. I think it was John Lennon who sang about instant karma. When I was a kid, there was a TV show called My Mother. Well, there's all kinds of conceptions about what karma is and what it does. But one of the concepts of karma that's very prominent in the ancient literatures that teach about yoga is that this whole universe that we're living in temporarily is for cosmic sensitivity training. If you were put into a laboratory to refine yourself and become more sensitive, then there would be ways in which you'd get instant feedback from your environment and long-term feedback also. And when one becomes aware of that, as you just so beautifully pointed out with the experience with your 3-year-old, and that you shout, he shouts. And so there's a way in which when we shout at the environment in general, when we overreact or when we unnecessarily cause harm to others, or any number of things, or the opposite as well. When we put out kindness and so forth, there is an inevitable reaction called karma that comes back to us. Of course, it's very complicated. This is one of the points made in the Bhagavad Gita, because there are unlimited combinations and permutations of our actions and our thoughts, and sorting it all out, which came first, the seed or the tree, it becomes very troublesome. Nonetheless, the point is there that you made so nicely, that when we're in a situation where obviously being emulated, and whatever we do comes back to us. It's there with those who have a partner too. There's an old saying that your mate is your mirror. And so what is it that drives you crazy about another person? Generally, it's that you see what you're doing wrong in them, oftentimes. Not always, but that is one of the ways that one can be particularly frustrated. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see if there's any other realizations, thoughts, fragments, whatever you got.
Two more things maybe related to the points that you made. One was don't assume. So when something happens, many times we try to extrapolate the reasons why this is happening, or this is why the other person is doing, and we are making that leap of doubt instead of leap where we are assuming things. And if the relationship is important, maybe you just defer the judgment of making those assumptions, that I'll wait for the full information to be available before I judge the other person. And that helps many times. When you get the information, it gets clarified, and you feel happy that you did not judge because you missed that information. Second, if you have the information and you really like, if the other person was really trying to get you, then you see, are the goals not aligned? Like, what is the other person trying to achieve, and what you are trying to achieve? If the goals are aligned, then typically you come around and somehow work it out. But if the goals are not aligned, then maybe you give the time, you just maintain distance, like till the goals are aligned. I just want to share those couple of things.
Well, thanks for sharing that. The first point that you made is elaborated in the book, The Four Agreements, and the author says, he gives this example. He says, man goes to the mall. This is pre-COVID. Man goes to the mall. He sees his friend walk out of the mall and out of one of the shops, and they look at each other eye to eye. And the man coming out of the shop just turns around and walks away, and doesn't acknowledge the other fellow. And so the man who was watching his friend come out of the store suddenly becomes morose, and he thinks, what did I do wrong? And what's wrong with my friend? He doesn't like me anymore. And then he starts to stew over it, and he thinks, wow, he doesn't like me. Well, I don't like him either, actually. And he goes on with a troubled mind over this issue for the next 5 days until the weekend comes. And then at a friend's house, he sees his friend who shunned him. And he confronts him. And he says, all right, I know you hate me. And by the way, I hate you too. But I just want to know, what I did wrong and why you don't like me anymore. And his friend says, what are you talking about? We're best friends. And he says, I saw you at the mall 5 days ago. You looked right at me. You turned around and walked away. There must be something wrong. He said, come on. I was coming out of the eye doctor. I had drops in my eyes. I couldn't see anything. I had to call my wife to have her drive me home. And so he gives this example. It's easy enough to track in one's own life that something comes up. I become annoyed with somebody, frustrated, and then because I assumed, then it makes it 10 times worse. I start thinking all kinds of unsavory things just in that gap where I didn't have the information, no clarity. Yeah, thanks, JM. That was important. Let's take one more before I give you the highly philosophical truth of frustration given in ancient literatures. There's some more coming in the chat box, I think.
Yeah,
Jim, can you tell me what it is? Because I can't see it without my reading glasses on.
Yeah, I'm just, I was just waiting if somebody wants to jump in.
Okay.
MA says, one of my friends shared his thought. I don't think that the frustration is indicative of the fact that we are not part of the material world. Rather, the world is not as it was meant to be. Wonder if you have any comment on this.
Well, what a segue, because I was just about to bring up the highly philosophical point. And here it is. This is actually an excerpt from a writing from one of the great teachers of old. The spiritual quality of the seer is manifest in our dissatisfaction with the limited state of materially conditioned existence. This is the difference between spirit and matter. So, as I brought up in our meditation, according to the yogic teachings, we're categorically different from the energy of the world. There's a hierarchy of energies in this world. The lower energies are called separated energies, and they're not conscious. For instance, a rock is not conscious, and water is not conscious. Air is not conscious. These are called inert or separated energies. But above these, there's a conscious entity. For instance, I'm living in a body right now, and it's made up of earth. As I've said before, if you cremate this body, then what you'll get is $2.42 worth of ashes. And the water will evaporate and go back into the air. And that wasn't me. According to the yogic texts, we are something separate. We move on from one vehicle to the next just as much as you change a coat and put on a new coat or get a new car. You move to the next one. So the hierarchy of energies is very important to understand, because if I misidentify myself with the lower energy, then I become frustrated, because I am very subtle. In fact, so subtle, the non-material energy, non-neural, non-mechanical entity that I am and that you are, when confronted with the mechanical, temporal, very clunky world of matter, and that includes even the thought world, which is extremely gross compared to the substance of the self or the Atma, becomes a source of constant frustration because it just doesn't work the way we are. And it becomes, as we connect ourselves to it, there's a statement in the Bhagavad Gita that says, Jayato Vishayan Punsam Sangas Teshu Pajayate. So this means, Jayato really is the word for meditation in the ancient Vedas. D means to intensely focus on something. And when you adjust the word in the sentence, it comes to dhyato, which means to contemplate or to fix your mind on something. Vishayam pumsam, which means the objects of this world that you think will give you happiness or pleasure, and you meditate on them, you focus on them, then you make a sangha with them. And a sangha means you become one with them, you connect to them. Have you ever had a favorite coat? Anyone? Favorite shoes? A few smiles. Favorite car? So did anybody tell you when you were going to shop or something like that, or after you got it, say, that's really you? This car is really you. Well, it's not really you, nor is the hat really you, literally, but it might be fit you and your physical frame and so forth. But I invest myself in it. There's a sangha, I think, this is me. Even more so, maybe a flag. Someone has painted a large American flag along the 101 freeway, and obviously has great devotion to the flag. But it's possible to change nationalities, move from one place to the next, have a different allegiance. The outside world, whatever we attach ourselves to, we invest in and say, this is really me. It happens in sports teams all the time. People say, this is my team, but it's not really the same team. They keep changing the players. And if you move to a different city, it's possible you could change your allegiance. But the world externally is always changing. It's not one thing, but I invest myself in it. I develop a sangha with it. And this creates a kind of frustrating situation. So actually, this is the way in which the yogic literatures describe how we're frustrated. And it points back to the fact that we are a higher energy and that we are ultimately incompatible with the lower energy that we're engaged with right now. And that is what this sentence means. And I'll just read it one more time for your comments or reflections. The spiritual quality of the seer is manifest in our dissatisfaction with the limited state of materially conditioned existence. That is the difference between spirit and matter. We don't like to grow old. We don't like that things diminish. We're always trying to keep them fresh because that's our nature. That's the nature of the non-material particle that we are. But the external world's constantly changing, and as it does, in an incompatible way, in a way that's incompatible, that is, with our nature, we become frustrated with it. That's highly philosophical. So here's a little equation. It's like algebra. I'm going to put it in the box. Who likes algebra?
There are lots of comments coming in.
Oh my God. Okay, here we go. Let me put my algebraic expression in here, and then we'll take the comments. The seer, whose quality is spiritual, plus limited state of materially conditioned existence equals frustration, which means the awareness of the difference between, which leads to, that's what that arrow is, leads to awareness of the difference between spirit and matter. Okay, tell me what comments are coming at us right now.
Yeah,
JM.
so there's one question from, I think it's a username Yabagina. What if something is meant to be a friend? How do you not take it personally?
Oh, what if somebody's meant to be a friend?
Meant to be it has meant it to be personal, like he's meaning it to be personal. So how do you not
Meaning
take
to
it
be personal. Well, there's a story in the Srimad Bhagavatam. I keep referring to that book because it's the quintessential teachings of Bhakti Yoga. And in there's this self-realized person who was actually, it's a long story. Should I tell the whole thing? Yeah? Okay. Actually, he goes through several lifetimes. King starts off as a famous king, but he gives up his kingdom. His name is Bharat. He gives up his kingdom in order to take up a life of meditation and austerity. So he goes to the forest, gives up everything, family, wealth, the kingdom, and he becomes a sage. And he's living alone in this beautiful forest where there's a stream. He's bathing several times a day, as Ashtanga yogis do. He's practicing his mantra every day. And he reaches this very high state of spiritual consciousness. And then one day, he's distracted by a scene where there's a deer that's pregnant, and she gets scared by the roar of a lion. So the deer jumps over the stream, but when she does so, she miscarries out of fear, and the deer falls down on the other side and is in the throes of death. And the little fawn that came out then is helpless in the water. So the meditating sage, Bharat, gets up and he saves the little fawn. But then his whole life becomes no longer centered on his meditation, but on the fawn, feeding it, taking care of it. And if there's a cute animal in the world, this, a baby deer would be a contender for the top slot. So his whole heart, attention, everything became absorbed in the deer. So at the time when he leaves his body, he wasn't fixated on his higher purpose. He got really absorbed in the deer. In fact, just fell in love with the deer. So when he died, he took birth as a deer. And in his next life, he was still aware of the fact that he had had the previous life as a deer. So he went back to the original place where he had practiced Ashtanga Yogi, and he waited out that lifetime. And in the next lifetime, he became this very highly realized personality called Jud Bharat. And Jada means something like dull or like a stone. He became indifferent to the world because he knew that any kind of little entanglement that he had with the world could bring him back into it. So he was living in a very detached way. And one day when he was walking along, he had a very strong, stout body. And there was another king coming by on a palanquin. You know what a palanquin is? Sometimes kings are carried on these. They have 4 carrying rods, and then there's a little compartment up top. The king sometimes sits on that and gets carried along. And so they were missing one person, and the king needed somebody else to carry it. So he just commandeered this person who looked very strong and who looked like an insignificant person and said, "Get over here, carry the palanquin." So this Jud Bharat was carrying the palanquin, but because he was self-realized, he was being very careful not to step on any ants on the ground because he didn't want to kill another living entity. So as he was carrying the palanquin, he was jostling the palanquin, and the king started shouting at him and saying, "What kind of an idiot are you? Supposedly you're strong, but what's wrong?" And he was insulting him, very deliberately insulting him. But Jud Bharat didn't take offense, and finally Jud Bharat started to speak, and he said, "Well, I'm not really insulted by your words because you're criticizing my body, and I'm not my body." And then the king suddenly realized that, "Oh, I made a big mistake. I shouldn't have, first of all, been berating anybody, but especially not this person who is a very highly realized personality." So the king then became the student of this Jud Bharat. But the point in that last section is that Jud Bharat didn't identify with his body. He didn't think, "I am my body." So when the king said to him, "What's wrong? Your body's too weak. Are you a weakling or something?" And he meant to insult him. Jud Bharat said, "I'm neither strong or weak. I'm not my body. I'm just riding within it. It's not me." So there's in being dispassionate about somebody berating you or something, I'm not saying that you should simply tolerate every single thing people do. There is due process, and there are things you might have to do in response. Not that you have to become a doormat, but there's an internal process through which one can realize that actually who is he or she insulting? It's not me. I'm beyond even the body. So that's a very esoteric answer. We could give other answers, but that goes back to the philosophy that we're not the body. We're actually something beyond it. JM, what else do we have?
There was a similar question, what to speak when, how can you be careful what to speak when some folks spoke at you?
Well, there's a document that I have that I can share with you all. I shared it once at Salesforce a long time ago. Let me see if I have it readily available. It's called Nonviolent Communication. And it's a long book worth reading. I don't think I could put files in that.
We can send the links after the.
Okay, we'll send it later. Nonviolent communication is a methodology you can learn when you're in any kind of situation that seems heated, or when, as the author puts it, when you really want to get what you want rather than just be right. And in nonviolent communication, there's the way of speaking, so you take out the intent. You don't accuse anybody or try to assume what their intent was. And in doing that, it takes the passion out of the situation. If you say, you meant to do this, I know you were just out to get me in return, then the situation becomes escalated. And you'll see from that document that there is a way of doing this, and it's very successful. I've given this document to many people, and I've gotten many return calls and emails where people said, wow, this really works. So I recommend trying this nonviolent communication.
Thanks. We send the document. One more question is, any reason why previous life knowledge and memories are blocked from the current stage?
Yeah, actually, if I was just thinking about this today, actually, you know, our bodies go through a lot, even in this life. If you went back and you recalled all the times that you had some discomfort in this life, then, and you remembered them constantly, you would be traumatized. Have you ever been traumatized in this life? For instance, I'll give you an example from my own life. I was in a minor car accident when I was in India, and we were driving somewhere early in the morning. It was a village. Things aren't marked well. In order to put a demarcation in the road, there was a huge stone that didn't have a reflector on it or anything. And, you know, the driver was looking for a gas station and wasn't watching, and then bang, we drove right into it. For 3 months after that, I was very nervous about getting into a car. Very nervous. I was fully aware that at any time, anything could happen in a vehicle, and we're very vulnerable getting into a car. If I added up all of those traumatic experiences I've had even in this life, I would be dysfunctional. So there's a way in which there's a kind of selective forgetfulness that is given to us as a kind of way that we can function. Because if we remembered all our experiences from previous lives, then it would be very difficult. Although the science is studied, as I may have mentioned before, at the University of Virginia, of children specifically. There are certain children who do remember their previous lives. And I'm not talking, this department is a scientific department. They only rely on empiric evidence and double-blind studies to come out with their findings, and they've written several books about this. There's a couple really good books on, what is the name of the author who wrote the first one? Do you remember, JM? In any case, there's a summary right now available from one of my colleagues. He did a vast study and sort of synthesized everything that's been done from that and everything else. And it's called, I believe it's called Reincarnation, that book. From Chaitanya Chandra. Maybe you could see it on the internet, and you can put it in here. That gives a summary of it and the phenomena of why we forget in our next life as well.
Jim Tucker, right?
Jim Tucker was the first one in that department. I think he passed away since he wrote that, but it catalogs the experiences of people of children. And it's a fascinating book. Okay. Any last reflections, JM? Because I chewed up a lot of clock here today and ran us out of time.
You know, the people are just thanking for all the knowledge and practice we are sharing. They are looking forward to the non-violent communication document.
Okay.
And definitely feeling like this is something that they need at this point.
I just have one if we have time.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just a couple of things. One, my wife said to me before, what someone else thinks of you or someone else's opinion of you is none of your business.
Right.
it sounds a little harsh, but when you break it down, it makes sense, right? And then she also says to me from this is kind of a nicer one than the first one, always try and remember that you never know what's going on in a person's life at home and work with them personally, their partner, their parents, their kids. They could be unhappy or have a feeling of sadness, which is translating into anger towards you. So
Yes, very wise words from your wife. In the book, which is called Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, the author gives this scenario when he's riding on a train, and man gets on with 3 unruly children, and the man's sort of staring off into space, and then the children start rummaging around in the compartment and disturbing everybody, and the man's being completely inattentive to his kids. So the author says that he turned to this man. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore, and he said, your kids are disturbing a lot of people. Could you please do something, control them? And the man replied, "Oh, I'm sorry." Sort of broke his trance, and he said, "Actually, we just came from the hospital, and their mother died, and I don't know what to do right now." And then the author's perspective completely changed. So, as your wife was saying, we don't know what other people are going through. Well, we have a couple minutes left. Let's leave off with a little bit of mantra meditation, a few mantras to leave us in that state of awareness of the higher energy. And in performing mantra meditation, we are using the power of sound, and the principle behind this is that there is sound which is called apurusheya. It comes from a higher dimension and descends to the lower. So there are very different vibrations in this world, but some of them have this higher refined quality, that they're non-material. So that's what mantras are. And they're passed down kind of like seeds. You may think, oh, it seems insignificant, but it's like a zip file. When you click on it, it opens up, and it takes you, there are algorithms that take you in a certain direction. So let's look at the first mantra. We said it once already 3 times, and we'll do it again. So if you just sit up a little straighter than you were a second ago, and then close your eyes. And then this mantra opens the heart to compassion. It's the 2 avatars, Nitai and Gauranga. I've spelt it phonetically so it's easy to follow. And I'll say it, and then please follow with me if you wish, behind muted mics. And a breath in. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. Nitai Gauranga. And now for the next mantra, I'm going to add a little bit of music, so just bear with me for 20 seconds. I have to grab my keyboard. Mantras go very well with music, as music has this very powerful way of opening our hearts, and then the mantra goes in deeper. And so I'm going to play a tune and sing this whole mantra, and then just listen the first time, and then the second time we'll do it together, and you can repeat. So let it go in, and then the second time we'll do it once together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And now try it all together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So there's two types of mantra meditation. One is called japa, where you say the mantra by yourself and listen to the sound vibration and keep bringing your attention back to the mantra. And the second kind is called kirtan or samkirtan, and that means that you sing it together with a group, and then there's a call and response. So that is more easily done when there's not a pandemic going on. Singing is one of the worst things to do in a group when the pandemic's happening. But we've been figuring out ways around that through software on the internet. One of them is called Jamulus, where we're able to connect a few musicians around the Bay Area and then have the call and response. It takes a little extra hardware and software to make that work, but one way or another, we're getting around it. But those two are using the mantra are very powerful, along with the kind of introspection that we did in the very beginning, just taking a look inside, taking a moment to objectify your thoughts, your body, and your life situation. All those things you can witness and notice that you're separate from. And if you can experience the satisfaction of that, even for a millisecond, you'll get a fruit that will encourage you to come back and do it again, because it's real. It's not a mental construction that dissolves and goes away, but it's actually something that you'll feel empowers you, and it gives you the strength to, for instance, overcome habits that you thought you couldn't before. You start to develop an otherworldly sense that you're getting an energy from somewhere else that actually lifts you up. This is the power of the mantra. So that and introspection that we did at the beginning can be very helpful in a home practice. I've gone way over, but it happens to be 1:08 on my clock, which is an auspicious number. So we'll stop there. And I thank you very, very much, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be with you. And I'll be counting the days until I see you again next week. Can you just unmute and say hey, or just like to hear your voices?
Hey, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
Enlightening as
Bye.
always.
Thank you.
Soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take good care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great
Bye.
weekend.
JM for
Thank
keeping
you.
it all together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Jay.
everyone.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, stay
Bye.
well.
Thank you.
Bye.